June 11th, 1970, 1:30 in the morning. Billy Batts was already dead in the trunk. Tommy DeSimone, Jimmy Burke and Henry Hill were driving up the Taconic State Parkway, and none of them knew Batts was still breathing. They'd beaten him unconscious at the club in Queens 40 minutes earlier, wrapped him in tablecloths, and stuffed him into Henry's car. They were heading upstate to bury a connected man from the Gambino family. An unauthorized hit, a violation of Mafia law that demanded blood for blood. And when they opened that trunk hours later and heard Billy Batts groaning, when they had to kill him again with shovels and tire irons, that's when the real problem started. Because Paul Vario, Tommy's boss, a capo in the Lucchese family, was about to find out that his crew had just put a target on all their backs. This isn't the story of what happened. This is the story of what could have happened if Henry Hill had told the truth when Vario asked him one simple question: who killed Billy Batts? In the movie Goodfellas, Henry hesitates. He protects Tommy. But what if he hadn't? What if Henry had given up Tommy DeSimone the moment Vario demanded answers? Would Vario have sacrificed Tommy to prevent a war between families? Would the Gambinos have been satisfied with one body instead of hunting the entire crew? And would the Lufthansa heist ever happened if Tommy DeSimone was killed in 1970 instead of 1979? This is Iconic Files, and this is the story of a decision that never happened but could have changed everything. You have to understand how the Mafia worked in 1970. There were rules, not laws. Rules. And the most important rule was simple. You don't touch a made man without permission. Doesn't matter if he insulted you. Doesn't matter if he disrespected you in front of your crew. Doesn't matter if he made you look like a nobody. If he's made, he's untouchable. You want him dead? You go through channels. You make your case. You wait for approval. And if you don't get it, you swallow your pride and move on. Tommy DeSimone didn't believe in swallowing anything. William Bentfainer, 39 years old, Gambino family soldier. Everyone called him Billy Batts. He'd been in prison since the 1960s on narcotics charges, 15 years for running heroin with the Ormento group. He got out in 1970, and his associates threw him a welcome home party at Robert's Lounge, a bar in Queens owned by Jimmy Burke, a Lucchese associate. In Goodfellas, the scene is shown at what appears to be Henry's bar, but that location is a cinematic simplification. Burke ran the place as neutral ground where different crews could drink, gamble, and do business without starting wars. That night, Billy Batts walked in like he owned the place. In his mind, he probably did. He was made. He had power. He had respect. And he had no idea that the young kid serving drinks, the one who used to shine shoes when Batts went away, that kid was now a killer. Tommy DeSimone was in his 20s, 6'2", violent temper, and a chip on his shoulder the size of Brooklyn. He'd been working for Paul Vario since 1960s, running truck hijackings, fencing stolen goods, breaking legs for loan sharks. Henry Hill described him as wearing a wise guy suit and a pencil mustache, trying to look older than he was, trying to prove he belonged. Tommy was good at violence. He was good at making money. But he was terrible at controlling himself. And when Billy Batts walked up to him that night and asked him if he still shined shoes, Tommy snapped. Here's what people don't understand about that insult. It wasn't just a joke. In the Mafia, your reputation is everything. If someone makes you look weak, if someone reminds everyone that you were nobody once, that you were on the bottom, you lose respect. And if you lose respect, you're dead. Tommy knew this. So when Batts made that comment, Tommy turned to Henry Hill and Jimmy Burke and said 5 words. I'm gonna kill that fuck. But he couldn't. Not that night. Because Billy Batts was made. And Tommy wasn't. 2 weeks later, June 11th, 1970, Billy Batts showed up at the Suite, a nightclub Henry Hill owned in Queens. The place was nearly empty. Just a few guys hanging around, playing cards, drinking. Tommy DeSimone walked in, saw Batts, and decided tonight was the night. He had Jimmy Burke with him. Jimmy was older, 40 years old, experienced, smart. Jimmy knew this was a bad idea, but Jimmy also knew you didn't tell Tommy no. So when Tommy pulled out his gun and started pistol whipping Billy Batts in the head, screaming, "Shine these fucking shoes," Jimmy held Batts down. They beat him until he stopped moving. Paul Vario was 56 years old in 1970. He'd been a capo in the Lucchese family since the 1950s, running crews out of Brooklyn, controlling gambling, loan sharking, hijacking operations at JFK Airport. Vario wasn't flashy. He didn't wear expensive suits or drive Cadillacs. He operated from the shadows, running his business out of a cab stand and a pizzeria, keeping his name out of the newspapers. He was smart. He was careful. And he had a violent temper that could erupt without warning. Henry Hill once watched Vario flip a table and beat the crap out of a restaurant manager because the guy spilled wine on Vario's wife. Then Vario sent his crew back that night to beat every staff member with baseball bats. That's who Tommy DeSimone worked for. A man who demanded respect, who controlled his territory with fear, and who understood that killing a made man without permission could get everyone killed. When Vario first heard about Billy Batts going missing, he knew. He didn't have proof, he didn't have details, but he knew, because Tommy DeSimone had been complaining about Batts for 2 weeks. Because Jimmy Burke had been acting nervous, because Henry Hill couldn't look him in the eye, so Vario did what any smart capo would do. He started asking questions, quietly, carefully, trying to figure out how bad this was going to be. And that's when he pulled Henry aside and asked him directly, who killed Billy Batts? In reality, Henry hesitated. He didn't want to give up Tommy. They were friends. They'd worked together for years. They'd made money together, hijacked trucks together, buried bodies together. So Henry stalled. He said he didn't know. He said maybe Batts went back to prison. He said maybe Batts left town. And Vario knew Henry was lying. But Vario didn't push. Not yet. Because Vario was waiting to see how the Gambino family would react. If the Gambinos didn't know who killed Batts, maybe this whole thing would blow over. Maybe they'd blame it on someone else. Maybe Vario's crew would survive. But what if Henry had told the truth? What if Henry had said, Tommy and Jimmy killed him, they beat him to death at my club and buried him upstate? What would Paul Vario have done? Here's what you need to understand about Paul Vario. He wasn't loyal to Tommy DeSimone. He was loyal to money. He was loyal to power. He was loyal to staying alive. Tommy was a good earner, sure. Tommy brought in cash from hijackings and robberies. But Tommy was also a liability. He was violent, unpredictable, and now he'd killed a made man without permission. If the Gambinos found out, they'd demand justice. And if Vario didn't give them Tommy, they'd come for everyone. Vario's crew, Vario's operations, maybe even Vario himself. So if Henry had confessed, Vario would have done the math. One body to prevent a war, one volatile, dangerous associate to protect an entire operation. The decision would have been easy. Vario would have killed Tommy DeSimone in 1970. But how? You can't just walk up and shoot a guy in your own crew without causing problems. Even if Tommy deserved it, even if everyone knew he'd violated the rules, you still need approval. So Vario would have gone to his bosses in the Lucchese family. He would have explained the situation. Tommy DeSimone killed Billy Batts, a Gambino soldier, without authorization. The Gambinos are going to find out, and when they do, they're going to want blood. Vario would have asked for permission to give them Tommy. Clean it up before it becomes a war. And the Lucchese leadership would have agreed. Because in 1970, the Gambino and Lucchese families had a strategic alliance. They worked together. They respected each other's territories. They didn't start wars over one soldier. So the bosses would have told Vario, handle it, make it quiet, and make sure the Gambinos know we're cooperating. Then Vario would have reached out to the Gambinos directly, probably through a sit-down, probably with a mediator from the commission. And Vario would have said, "We know what happened to Billy Batts. We know who did it, and we're giving him to you." That's how the Mafia worked. When someone violated the rules, you handed them over. You showed respect, you prevented escalation, and you protected your own operation. Tommy DeSimone would have been told he was getting made. That's the classic setup. You tell a guy he's about to become a made man, the highest honor in the Mafia. You tell him to dress nice, meet at a specific location, and come alone. Tommy would have believed it. He'd been waiting for this his whole life. He would have walked into that room thinking he was about to become untouchable, and instead he would have been shot in the head, probably by someone from the Gambino family, probably by someone who knew Billy Batts personally. The Lucchese family would have watched, they would have sanctioned it, and they would have walked away clean. Tommy DeSimone would have died in 1970 instead of 1979, 9 years earlier, before the Lufthansa heist, before the body count got worse, before everything fell apart. And what about Jimmy Burke? Jimmy helped kill Billy Batts. He held him down while Tommy beat him. He helped bury the body. So why wouldn't the Gambinos want Jimmy dead too? Because Jimmy was valuable. Jimmy Burke was one of the best earners in the Lucchese family. He ran hijacking crews at JFK Airport. He had connections with unions, with truck drivers, with cargo handlers. He made millions for the family, and unlike Tommy, Jimmy wasn't a hothead. He was strategic. He was disciplined. He killed when necessary, not when he was angry. So if Vario went to the Gambinos and said, "We're giving you Tommy, but we need to keep Jimmy," the Gambinos might have agreed, especially if Jimmy delivered something valuable in return. Money, information, a future favor. The Mafia was a business, and businesses make deals. But here's the thing. If Tommy died in 1970, Jimmy Burke's entire operation would have changed, because Tommy was one of Jimmy's best guys. Tommy was fearless. He was willing to do the dirty work. He was the muscle Jimmy needed for high-risk jobs. Without Tommy, Jimmy's crew would have been weaker, smaller, more vulnerable, and that means some of the biggest crimes in Mafia history might never have happened. The Lufthansa heist. December 11th, 1978. $6 million in cash and jewels stolen from the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK Airport. The biggest cash robbery in American history at the time, and Tommy DeSimone was one of the robbers. He was on the crew, he was inside the terminal, he was part of the plan. If Tommy had been dead for 8 years by 1978, Jimmy Burke would have needed someone else to fill that role. Maybe he would have found someone, maybe he wouldn't. But without Tommy, the crew's dynamic changes, the trust level changes, the risk calculation changes, and maybe, just maybe, the Lufthansa heist never happens. And if the Lufthansa heist never happens, Jimmy Burke doesn't become paranoid. He doesn't start killing everyone involved. He doesn't murder Stax Edwards for leaving fingerprints in the getaway van. He doesn't kill Martin Krugman, the guy who brought the potential heist score. He doesn't kill Parnell Edwards, Louis Cafora, Joe Manry. The body count doesn't pile up. And Henry Hill doesn't become a witness against the crew, because without the Lufthansa heist, there's no FBI investigation, no pressure, no reason for Henry to flip. Paul Vario would have avoided prison, Jimmy Burke would have kept earning, Henry Hill would have stayed loyal, and the story that became Goodfellas would have been completely different. But Tommy's death in 1970 would have done something else. It would have sent a message to every associate, every soldier, every wannabe wise guy in New York. The message would have been clear. You kill a made man without permission, you die. No exceptions. No second chances. Doesn't matter who you work for. Doesn't matter how much money you make. You violate the rules. You pay the price. And that message might have prevented other murders. Because guys like Tommy DeSimone weren't unique. There were dozens of violent, impulsive, dangerous associates running around New York in the 1970s. Guys who thought they were untouchable because they had a crew behind them. Guys who killed first and asked questions later. But if they saw Tommy get whacked for killing Billy Batts, they might have thought twice. They might have shown restraint. They might have followed the rules. Or maybe not, because the Mafia in 1970 was already breaking down. The old rules were fading. The Commission was losing power. Families were fighting each other over territory, over money, over respect. The five families were becoming more fractured, more violent, more chaotic, and guys like Tommy DeSimone were the future. Reckless, brutal, willing to break any rule to get ahead. So, maybe Tommy's death wouldn't have changed anything. Maybe someone else would have killed a made man. Maybe the Gambinos would have retaliated anyway. Maybe the violence would have escalated no matter what Paul Vario did. But here's what we know for sure. Paul Vario was a pragmatist. He wasn't sentimental. He didn't protect people out of loyalty. He protected his operation. And if giving up Tommy DeSimone in 1970 meant avoiding a war with the Gambino family, he would have done it without hesitation. Henry Hill knew this. That's why he didn't tell the truth. Because once Henry said Tommy's name, Tommy was dead, and Henry would have been responsible. He would have been the guy who gave up his friend. He would have been the rat. Even though Tommy deserved it, even though Tommy had violated the most sacred rule in the Mafia, Henry couldn't do it. Not then, not in 1970. But 9 years later, in 1979, someone did. Someone told the Gambino family that Tommy DeSimone had killed Billy Batts and Ronald Gerothy, another Gambino associate, and someone gave Tommy up. Most people believe it was Paul Vario, because by 1979, Vario had plenty of reasons to want Tommy dead. Tommy had attempted to rape Henry Hill's wife, Karen, who Vario was having an affair with. Tommy had lifted his ski mask during the Lufthansa heist, putting the entire operation at risk. Tommy had become too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much of a liability. So Vario allegedly told John Gotti, a rising Gambino captain and a close friend of Billy Batts, that Tommy was about to be made, and Gotti allegedly killed him. On January 14th, 1979, Tommy DeSimone walked into an apartment in Queens thinking he was about to become a made man. He never walked out. His body was never found. Some claim that Gotti shot Tommy 3 times in the head and that Tommy's death was instantaneous. But other accounts say Gotti tortured Tommy first. That he made Tommy suffer because Foxy Geroth had been Gotti's friend. Because after killing Batts, Tommy killed another connected man named Ronald Foxy Gerotha, who was a Gambino associate and close to Gotti. So Gotti wanted Tommy to feel every second of pain before he died. Either way, Tommy DeSimone was dead. 9 years after he killed Billy Batts, and a few years after killing Foxy. 9 years after Paul Vario could have stopped everything by giving him up. 9 years too late. But what if Paul Vario had acted in 1970? What if Henry Hill had told the truth when Vario asked him who killed Billy Batts? Would Tommy have died quietly, quickly, efficiently? Would the Gambino family have been satisfied with one body instead of waiting 9 years for revenge? Would Paul Vario's crew have survived intact? Would the Lufthansa heist have happened? Would Goodfellas even exist? We'll never know, because Henry Hill protected Tommy, and Tommy lived for 9 more years. And in those 9 years, Tommy committed more murders, more robberies, more violence. He killed Michael Spider Gianco, a bartender who talked back to him. He killed Stanley Diamond during a beating that went too far. He killed Dominic Remo Sassani on Jimmy Burke's orders. He killed Ronald Gerothy, a Gambino protege, because Gerothy had threatened him to reveal secrets if Tommy didn't stop dating his sister. And every one of those murders brought more heat, more attention, more danger to Paul Vario's crew. Tommy DeSimone was a ticking bomb, and Paul Vario knew it. But Vario didn't act, not in 1970, not when he had the chance. Maybe because Henry didn't give him the full story. Maybe because Vario thought he could control Tommy, Maybe because Vario didn't realize how dangerous the situation was. But by the time Vario finally gave Tommy up in 1979, it was too late. The damage was done. The Lufthansa heist had brought the FBI down on everyone. Jimmy Burke was killing witnesses left and right. Henry Hill was about to flip, and Paul Vario's entire operation was about to collapse. On May 3rd, 1988, Paul Vario died in federal prison. He was 73 years old. He'd been convicted of extortion, fraud, and conspiracy. He'd spent his final years in a cell, his empire destroyed, his reputation ruined. Henry Hill's testimony had put him there. The same Henry Hill who once had the chance to stop everything by telling Vario the truth about Billy Batts. The same Henry Hill who chose loyalty over survival. The same Henry Hill who eventually chose survival over loyalty when it was too late to matter. And that's the real lesson of this story. In the Mafia, loyalty is a weapon. It's used to manipulate you, to control you, to make you take risks you shouldn't take. Paul Vario demanded loyalty from Henry Hill. But Vario wasn't loyal to Tommy DeSimone. He used Tommy until Tommy became a problem. Then he gave him up. That's how the Mafia worked. Loyalty flowed up, never down. If Henry Hill had understood that in 1970, if he'd told Vario the truth about Billy Batts, Tommy would have died and Henry would have lived free. No witness protection, no testimony, no life on the run. He would have been the guy who did the right thing, the guy who followed the rules, the guy who prevented a war. But Henry chose friendship. Also, he knew that Tommy is close to Burke, and Burke won't spare him if he become a rat. And friendship in the Mafia is a death sentence. Because eventually, everyone betrays everyone. It's just a matter of time. Tommy DeSimone betrayed the rules by killing a made man. Paul Vario betrayed Tommy by giving him to the Gambinos. Henry Hill betrayed everyone by becoming an informant. Jimmy Burke betrayed his entire crew by killing them after the Lufthansa heist. And the Mafia itself betrayed the idea that honor and loyalty meant anything in a world built on violence and greed. So what if Henry Hill had told Paul Vario the truth about Billy Batts in 1970? Tommy would have died quietly. The Gambinos would have been satisfied. Paul Vario's crew would have survived. The Lufthansa heist might never have happened, and Henry Hill would have learned the most important lesson in the Mafia 9 years early. In this life, you protect yourself first, because no one else will. That's the story. A decision that never happened, a confession that was never made, a betrayal that came 9 years too late. And the bloody trail of bodies left behind because one man chose loyalty over survival, in a world where survival was the only thing that mattered. If you found this deep dive into one of the Mafia's biggest what-ifs fascinating, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We drop a new untold mob story every single week. Drop a comment below. If you were Henry Hill in 1970, would you have given up Tommy to save yourself? Or would you have kept quiet and hoped for the best? Let me know your take.